Yeah, next I want to welcome you to the exciting student panel that we prepared. And particularly, I think it's an opportunity we can directly hear from our students and also welcome our students to join us as well. And before we dive in, I want to introduce Wajiha, Umar. She is our Student Union Education Officer, and she will convey the discussion for us.
Hi everyone, I'm Wajiha. I am the Education Officer at the LSE. I think from a student perspective, assessment feedback can be something that is a bit of a wicked problem, where to students, maybe it's something that's like an easy quick fix, and it's like, why am I not getting my assessments on time? Why did I not get this feedback, etc., etc. And I think in my job, I've realized that I have to look at problems from a student perspective, staff perspective, and then somewhere in the middle. And I always think that it's useful in these situations and in these conversations to have the student perspective so that you also understand where students are coming from and what frustrations they deal with. So I have two students here for you. They are going to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to ask them a couple questions that I've posed to them, and then I will open it up so that you guys can also ask them questions as well. So.
Hi everyone, my name is Veronika. I'm a third-year management student, undergraduate.
My name is Musa. I'm a second-year history student.
Okay, so my first question is, what type of feedback do you find most beneficial when you want to improve your assessments? And do you have any examples of when you've experienced best practice?
I think I'll go first for that one. So yeah, in terms of the type of feedback that I'm given, and the best one for me is definitely written feedback, but with a combination of verbal feedback as well. But not to stress that, with a stress on written feedback basically. So in what that looks like is if I submit a formative or an essay and the teacher has written comments that are exact to the sentences that I needed to improve on, I would then look at that and then sort of ponder about it, think where I could improve. But then what's also important is that I book an office hour and then talk through those exact comments with the teacher and sort of elaborate on that. But yeah.
I would agree. So in management, I've kind of taken a combination of both more qualitative and quantitative modules. And I found that for both, written feedback is like most beneficial for me. Also with the option to later on book office hours to kind of discuss the comments further and really understand them. I found that for some quantitative modules, maybe sometimes students don't actually see that they need the office hour based on the feedback. So for example, the feedback could just kind of refer to if they've done the problem correctly rather than checking every single step of the method and making sure everything is there correct. So students may not even realize that they need to book an office hour to discuss this later. So I found that sometimes when teachers have always also been like proactive and maybe suggesting that, okay, for this problem, so like maybe it's good if we discuss this as well in an office hour. I found that really beneficial.
And that's what answers my next question in terms of verbal, written, or a combination of feedback. When you get written feedback, what is the best form? Do you like it when it's like highlighted parts and comments? Do you prefer paragraphs? I know something that in my department is that they had like criteria for each section. So they had critical, judgment, content, and presentation, and then you were marked out of each section. And I know lots of departments do something similar. So do you prefer comments under each thing?
Yes. So for me, especially with history and how like subjective it is, and you know, the very different nature of essays that any student can write, I think the best structure for me when it came to assessments was, feedback was comments on specific sentences throughout the essay, but then after that, 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph on what I did well, and then the second paragraph on what I needed to do to improve. And I feel like in the past, a lot of my teachers focused too much on what I needed to improve, but didn't really give me a good answer on what I did well. I mean, it's always nice to have that sort of confidence and reassurance of what you did well. I think is really important. And it is important as much as what went well. One more thing in terms of comments is like, sometimes I sort of notice that some comments are quite rushed and actually didn't really say anything in terms of those individual comments on sentences. So as much as I appreciate those sentences, a lot of them sometimes can be like lackluster and I'm kind of lost on what they mean. But yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can add on the more quantitative side of quantitative modules. I would agree with everything that you said about essays. I think comments specific to particular sections kind of show that it's personalized to the student's work, and that's what I think students would value. But for quantitative modules, I've also noticed that sometimes the feedback seems a bit rushed, so maybe there's like tick, 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 okay, answer is correct, moving on, rather than kind of, for example, acknowledging that, okay, in order in an exam to get full marks for this question, you also need to, like, for example, list the variables, or there are certain sort of key points that you need to mention in an answer in order to get the marks. So maybe kind of seeing that reflection in how the comments would then translate onto the grade would be also beneficial.
I know that a common frustration that students have is that when they get a number or a grade, but then the comments don't seem to match up. So you'll get a comment saying, this was amazing, well done, and then your grade will be like 60, 70%. It's like, why was it not 70? And I know that that is something, it's like a small thing that is maybe simple to change from a student perspective, but it is a frustration that comes up again and again. Another question I have for you is, what do you think your department specifically does well? And then in terms of like feedback culture, but also what would you say that they need to improve on?
So for the history department, just sort of trying to repeat myself, but yeah, they do really well in sort of comments on my formative essays. They're very clear and concise, and following that in office hours. I think discussions about historiography and historical debates are in those office hours are really useful as well. You know, it really like sort of reminded me that this person's a professor. He's like they're really educated and like they're just helping me, and I think that's really good, giving me a sort of confidence that I won't get from online resources or from the readings. So that's really crucial. I think I don't doubt the abilities of the teachers when talking about the topics that I'm doing, save hands. However, there's one sort of aspect that I don't really like in terms of feedback, in the sense that I don't know the reasoning for this. For example, for one of my modules called HY200, it's about the rights of man. For the sake of like tradition, they've said your feedback for your first assignment, which was a presentation worth 50% of my module, will only be given in verbal feedback. And that struck me because I was like, I wonder why that is, and I wasn't given a reasoning. And maybe it's just tradition, it's just the way it's done. So they emphasized, yeah, you're only going to get feedback on this presentation through an office hour, we won't write it down for you. And I think that didn't sit right with me in the sense that this is 50% of my grade, this isn't even a formative, it is defining a part of my grade, and I would like feedback so I can use that for third year presentations or other modules that require presentations in second year. So I think I would like to know more reasonings about that if other departments do it as well. Because obviously verbal feedback, I can't write it down and then know how to improve. It's kind of very reliant on memory. If I can think of any others, oh yeah, there's also one thing that I really would like from teachers, in the sense that as a student, it's quite easy to get carried away with my, other commitments in life and my degree, balancing societies, and so sometimes it's easy to be disengaged with the degree at certain points. And so I was just telling Wajiha before this, is that like I'd really appreciate it if sometimes teachers gave spontaneous feedback that I didn't ask for. For example, like after class, they're saying, "Oh, I thought you've been doing well on this." Just a little 2-minute conversation or something like that to keep me sort of engaged, even if I didn't ask for it. And that can even be simply as, "I'd like to have an office hour with you," and the teacher telling, and then if the student doesn't book it, it's on them. But I would like a bit more sort of care and attention in terms of my development, because I mean, I guess you could say it's me being lazy, but I don't think it's like that. It's because I just want to see, like, yeah, just that development in the sense when I'm not fully engaged with the degree, it really would help.
Yeah. I know that there was discussion before in terms of giving more personalised responses and then showing that you basically care in your feedback. And I think it's a good point of like initiative from both sides of, if you notice a student is maybe either struggling or doing well, just engaging in conversation with them.
I think for me, it would be a little bit difficult to talk about the whole department in general, just because I noticed that feedback really varies with, not only with each module, but also with each teacher. So maybe something that I think could be maybe improved is if, for example, for essay subjects, if teachers could indicate when they give us feedback on formative essay, they could indicate what sort of like the idea of the grade would be, because sometimes they don't kind of give like a mark for the actual formative. It's just comments. So again, kind of reflecting the feedback in the final mark, because it is important after all to students. Like it affects our employment opportunities even in the end. So I think just seeing that reflection in the grade, and also like you talked about the attention and care. Of course, I think it's also good for students to be proactive, but I wish sometimes that proactivity also kind of came from the other side. So maybe finding like a balance if the teacher notices that someone is struggling or doing well. Great.
If you had to answer what makes feedback work for you in one word, what would it be? I didn't get this question to
Conciseness, is that what? Conciseness. Yeah.
I would say personalization. It's personal.
Yeah. We're training a bunch of academic reps right now, and we asked them to also answer what makes feedback work for you. We got 75 responses, and the word that came up in the majority of them was constructive. So they want constructive and scaffolded responses. They want things that are constructive criticism, constructive feedback, rather than either just being told what you did badly, or being told you did great and then maybe your mark doesn't match up with that. Detailed, concise was another word that came up, and honest. People want constructive and supportive feedback. I wonder if any of you have any questions for our students, because they are here.
Yes, I have lots, but I'll keep it to one. Thank you both for coming. It's really, really useful. You talked about, at the end in particular, you talked about conciseness being really helpful in processing your written feedback, and you both said that written feedback was kind of the gold standard. I think a lot of us teachers, when we're giving feedback, we're sort of torn between giving you detail, but also, I need you to write enough. So I'm curious, like, when you look at your written feedback, would you be perfectly satisfied with maybe 6 bullet points of just kind of short but actionable feedback versus, 300 words of prose, because we're writers. I was going to say we love to write, but not necessarily writing that much on essays. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so personally for me, I actually do like the prose and I like the paragraph, because I feel like if it's too bullet pointy, they're not really going to say enough of the feedback that I need. I think having it in prose it's just it's nicer to read as well as a student, and I can also, so it just adds more, how do I say, it opens the doors for more discussion points when speaking with the teacher in an office hour regarding that paragraph.
I think for me it depends kind of how the bullet points are structured. I think if they're very detailed and they actually refer to a particular point mentioned in the essay and they kind of elaborate on it, then I think that would also be a good way to present feedback, like as a list of bullet points. But if it's actually like very detailed and still going back to what we mentioned before.
I actually, the point I can ask is, John was my teacher at one point, and so I really, really did not like data science. I did my degree in psychology, and I'm really sorry, but I really struggled with the quantitative side of my degree, and I didn't do as well in my other in that module compared to my other modules. But because of the feedback that I got from John and how it was structured, and I really, really didn't realize I was experiencing best practice until I got that feedback, my grade went so much higher. Like, it was incredible. I think I got the highest grade I ever got in a, DS202 module. Like, that's how good the feedback was. And I think there's a really, really good point in terms of what John did was that your assessment was, if it was marked out of 100, you knew which part of your criteria you were going to get marked out of 50, out of like 25 and 25. Was it based off of like content, critical judgment, whatever it was, and it was more quantitative, but I feel like you could do it for qualitative as well. And you would get a mark out of the number that was associated with each section, and then you would get a comment as well. Whether that was a paragraph or it was in bullet points, you knew exactly the justification for your grade, and then you also got what you did well and what you needed to improve in. And that always worked very, very, like, I feel like that was a good template in terms of good assessment feedback. And then on the psychological and behavioural science side, something that they did in my first year was very personalised comments. So I know that we saw on the screen where you get highlights and then you got the annotations of like what your teacher thought exactly of what you had written. That was so useful because when it comes to critical judgment, I think in qualitative subjects, you're not sure what more you could have added. And I think this is also about like the culture thing that I think John did really well in the classroom as well, of like making mistakes and also doing model answers. I felt very comfortable making mistakes in data science because John literally made them in front of us. He would run things and then they wouldn't work, and I'd be like, okay, so I'm not crazy. It's just a normal thing. Yeah, it's just a thing that happens. And I think that I wonder for like qualitative subjects, if you wrote a really terrible paragraph, for example, and then you improved it in front of your students, maybe they would be more comfortable in giving you, in when you give them feedback, of like receiving that, of knowing that, again, you are just people who are like experts in your field, and receiving that feedback from you as well. I know that there was another question. Yes.
Have you experienced self-assessment kind of or peer feedback in your studies, and if yes or no, what is your opinion about it? Would it be useful?
I think from what I remember, I've only experienced it in the first year, maybe with LSE 100, but not with any kind of like degree modules. So I'm not too sure how I feel about it. I think it depends kind of what form that would take, I guess, and also for what modules. I think maybe for SE subjects that would be quite useful because there's a number of ways to answer the SE question correctly usually. So I think maybe kind of having or hearing other people's ideas, our peers' ideas, what they thought about, or like how they, for example, structured the argument. I think that could be useful where there's like a multiple number of responses.
I think I sort of agree with her in the sense that I actually haven't done that many peer reviews in class in LSE. But one thing I can say from my experience, even throughout primary and secondary education and A levels, peer reviews never really. I never found the point in it personally because like a lot of the time I never really know if the person next to me is going to be qualified enough to like really help me. And I know this sounds sort of like arrogant, but like in the sense that like I don't know, it doesn't seem right in the sense sometimes their comments aren't correct, sometimes it is correct, but it's taking that risk that I didn't really wasn't really comfortable doing. And I think, however, one thing I do like in classes is where we're having class discussions about the readings. I think that's really, really crucial and it's really, really important because then I can take inspiration from what someone said about a reading that perhaps I didn't think of. But yeah, that's really crucial.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your contributions. My question for you is to ask, do you expect different things in terms of your formative work versus your summative work? Are there different things you're looking for, or do you basically want that same balance that you've both articulated in different ways?
I think I can maybe answer first. I would like the same balance. I think also kind of what I struggle with is that oftentimes with summatives we don't really get feedback. So with quantitative modules we usually just get a grade and that's like sort of it. So I think we're missing out on some learning opportunities from that chance to review, for example, even if just at least review, get access to the marked papers so that we can see exactly where we lost the points, like where we went wrong, and to improve for future years. And I find that with summatives it's not quite as in-depth or interfaces with formatives.
I would actually say that I would like more detailed and hyper-focused feedback on my formatives because I found that in my first year of university, when it came to my exam time, 3-hour exam to define my grade in one module grade, I actually found myself looking back to the formatives and all the advice that they gave me, and I actually took direct action upon that and was able to perform really well in my final exam in the timed exam. So I think actually I would prefer and prioritize formatives over summatives because I feel like for summatives, you've reached the end goal, it's done. And yes, I can improve, but that'll just be for the next year when I do another summative. But formative, are really crucial. I always make sure to do them as well to make sure that I'm in a good position when it comes to exam season.
Thank you. There's a question online. No.
Who is online?
Yeah. Just a very quick follow-up. What are your views on not getting a grade for the formative, but getting a lot of detailed feedback? Because I know some departments do it, I do it in my courses, and I just wanted to get your view on saying, you're not anchored to that, why did I get X, but how can I improve for my summative?
Yeah, actually, so personally for me, I really need a number, I'm not gonna lie. I just need the mark. And it's not even to say I need to know if I did well. Even if I did really badly, and let's say I got like, I don't know, a 50 in an essay, and there was some really detailed feedback, I just want to know what that number was. Because for me as a student, I want to be able to see that sort of progression, and say, yeah, I was at 50 at this point, but then 6 months later, I was at 70, you know what I mean? And I just like, for my own personal development, to be able to have a track record on what I have. So yeah, that's just my personal opinion.
I think also, yes, you kind of mentioned, I think it's good to have an idea of the grade at least, or like, maybe not if it's a 65, maybe like just a range at least, like, okay, mid to 1. Just so that we know, like, okay, if we, for example, obviously apply all this feedback, like, how will it actually improve our performance? How will it improve our grade? So I think an idea of the grade is very beneficial. I don't think it would necessarily kind of put the whole focus on the mark itself, but I think it's like more beneficial in the sense that it would show us, okay, like how much more do we need to do to, let's say, get a 17.
My department never gave informative grade. I don't know, maybe it does come down to personal preference. I liked not getting a grade. But they did, I think that what they used to do is they would give you an indication of what level you were. So they would rate it. So if you were, say you were at like 9 out of 10, if you improved, you'd basically be moving up a level, sort of thing. I don't know if that comes down to personal preference or if there is a way that you can maybe show where the grade progression would be. I'm not sure if there are any other questions on that.
Can I just follow up on that about like if you get a grade for performative? How would you feel if the grade was delayed, that you had to engage with the feedback before you could see the grade? Or how do you think that would impact the way in which you receive the feedback?
That is a good question. Yeah, I think personally for me, this person from looking like the mark itself, the grade itself is secondary. Obviously, the primary thing is the feedback. So if I know that I'm going to get a mark, if I directly take on from the feedback, then I think that'd be really good as well. And I feel like for students who don't do that, who don't engage with the feedback, that'd be a good incentive in a way. But for me, even without this system, the mark is never really the defining thing. It's just always really, really nice to have. But obviously, I'm always looking at the feedback primarily.
I think maybe that could sort of like actually put the focus on the feedback for most students then, just because we wouldn't, I guess, be looking at the grade as much. And then maybe we would have sort of like analyzed ourselves, like, okay, if I change this, how would it kind of impact, how would it improve my work? And then maybe getting that kind of confirmation from the teacher later on, okay, to see if like what I thought of the feedback is actually aligns with what the teacher thought as well. I think that could be a good solution.
Good. How do you feel about anonymity when it comes to grading? So do you appreciate it when you're marked anonymously, or because, like, for example, as a marker, you cannot comment on how well you progress from last time if that's anonymous, right? So I cannot make comments on that, I cannot make judgments on that. How do you feel about that? The anonymity question.
I think if it's not anonymous, it feels a little bit more personalized, just because then I guess that person can comment on sort of like the progress and development. And then I just feel like that kind of shows more care and attention to their personal performance. Whereas if it's anonymous, I feel like it just maybe, we can't see the kind of the full context of the feedback.
I would say it's also really important in terms of summative and formatives. So for formatives, I would say I want to know who did it and who marked it. But then for summatives, I don't really care, to be honest, because I'm already done because it's the results. But for formatives, yeah, it's really nice because it goes back to my point about how I want to have that, you know, that progression and that relationship with the teacher in terms of constant feedback. So if I know my same teacher is marking my formatives, and you know, I read my feedback with the context of, oh yeah, he might have said that in class last week or something like that. So I make those connections, and holistically, this gives me more satisfaction, way more satisfaction if I know. But that's formative.
I actually have a follow-up question. How would you feel with your formative or summative feedback if you were given like personalized feedback the same way you are from a teacher, but then there was an additional part where it's AI generated like comments in terms of like feedback that AI had given you once the work has been scanned through a system or an algorithm?
I think there's actually no harm in that, and I think it's quite nice because I also assume, like, from my experience with AI and ChatGPT, that they always say things in a very concise manner. And so, really going back to my point about conciseness and just that quick, what was that? If they completely destroy my essay, I would appreciate that still, because then I can see, okay, so not only my teacher is destroying it, AI is destroying it. But vice versa, if it does it really well, then I'm satisfied.
I think as long as teacher feedback is the base and sort of AI feedback is like an extra additional point, I think then it's okay, because I still want to get that kind of personalized feedback from an academic that I know like is skilled, because also I could probably also ask AI myself to like grade or make up. So I don't know if that would be like as kind of beneficial.
Okay. Thank you so much.